Hi, my name is Doug Johnson. I'm the Executive Director of the McLean County Arts Center, and I want to welcome you to our watercolor workshops, part of our Stay Home Art Challenge projects. Watercolor is a great medium. It allows for a lot of experimentation. It is easily transportable. It can give you hours of relaxation. And it's something that you can easily store in your house or take on vacation and use whenever you like. So the function of this class will be that we'll have a series of 10-minute videos, and then approximately every other week we'll have a live Zoom video where you can join in, and we'll have a critique and discussion and explore the projects and the assignments that class members have done. And then we'll have more projects, and hopefully this will all culminate in you having a nice body of work and a new skill set that you can enjoy for years to come. The basic material we're using is a block of watercolor paper, and my favorite is the Arches 140-pound cold press. We're using Canson Monteval watercolor tablet here. It's a fine tablet. I like using a tablet as opposed to loose sheets or a notebook that has a spiral bound, because it holds the paper tight as you're painting. Without that, as water soaks into the paper, it may buckle or puddle, and it gives you less control as a result. The nice thing about this is you can do the whole painting, even paint all the way up to the edges, and when you're done and it's dried a bit, you can just take a straight edge and peel it off around the edges, set it aside to dry, and you can start your next painting. If you have several tablets, you can work on several paintings all at once. There's real advantage to that. So the paint we're using initially is the English watercolor method palette, which is a Indian red, which is a clay color, and a new gamboge or Indian yellow, which is a plant-based color, and indigo, same blue that you probably have your jeans dyed. So very straightforward palette. It was originally designed for portability. Watercolor painting has been around for a long time. The English watercolor method really comes out of the Norfolk school in northern England. And those painters like Cotman and like Thurtle, who were innovators with the use of that minimal palette, created a really terrific body of work. We're going to work on our second exercise today, which is coming up with gradations in value. And first we're going to use just yellow and just red and just blue, so we can give ourselves a 5-step range so we can see how we're applying that paint. And you can watch what I'm doing along now, and feel free to stop the video at any point so you can do along with us. Now, I'm using that English watercolor method, so I have Indian red, and I have gamboge and indigo. So I typically start with this exercise. I start with a middle tone, and then I work to my lights and then my darks. So you can see here I've already gridded off on my piece of paper a series of squares, and I'll start here. So just mixing a little bit of water with the paint, and I'm trying to stay tidy within my lines, and that's just a wet on dry, and that's kind of a middle tone. You can still see the paper, but the tonality of the color is certainly evident. So I'll do my next approximate square. I'll do the last one at the same time, and while that paint and water is still wet, I can come in and offer more paint to make that a fully intense, fully covered section. So that's plenty dark. That's about as dark and intense as you're ever going to find. Now I have two different containers here for water. And although I don't always do it as well as I'd like, I always try to use just one container for dirty water and one container for clean water so that I don't mix them up. The last thing you want to do is to contaminate your colors with previously used colors. So I'm slowly introducing a little bit more pigment in each of these. Now, it's fairly straightforward mixing color, but it's coming up with those steps that seem to be evenly distributed between areas. That becomes the complication. And you want to be sure as well not to add too much water. You don't want to create these vast puddles that take forever to dry. So and the nice thing about this as well is that you can allow this to dry and then come back and reassess and add more paint later on. There you have my initial effort with red with different levels of intensity. Not too happy with everything, but it's a work in progress. So I've cleaned my brush. I'm going back in and picking up some of this yellow, and again I'll start off in that middle area, that middle value, and just block that in. And because yellow is so light, I'm going to go ahead and do that first one with just a hint of color. And one of the things that's nice and fresh about watercolor is how much we can see the page. And so later on, when we're talking about creating compositions or finding images that are good to create a watercolor painting, I'm going to ask that you pay special attention to that value scale. The values that are presented in the source image you want are the areas that you can really exploit and keep a lot of that white of the paper showing. That's what's going to give your painting that pop. That's what's going to make it seem very fresh when you have those big punctuations of translucent color or the white of the page popping. So we'll let that dry a little bit, and I'm going to move on to blue. So I'm just putting down that middle tone. I can go a little bit darker. That's pretty darn dark. A little bit darker. That's better. And then fully covering my square for the darkest. One thing you may note while you're applying paint to the paper, and we'll talk about this more later, is the way the paint itself reacts with the water and the texture of the paint. Because paint, watercolor paint, comes from a variety of sources. So there are some colors, like Indian red, which come from clay, and so it is a sedimentary color. And as that dries, you'll get the pigments settling down into the crevices of the paper. And other colors are staining colors, and those are colors that come from plant dyes typically, and so they tend to be more even in their coat. Oftentimes, if you make a painting where you're applying both sedimentary and staining colors, you can get a wonderful interaction between the paint as it kind of layers itself down on the piece of paper. So I'm just going to add a little bit more here, just darkening that a bit, hopefully not too much. That's pretty good. Okay, excellent. This next part of the assignment is a little more complicated, and what we're going to do is come up with an additional 5 steps, but mixing a gray. Now you can go to the paint store and you can get a pre-mixed color gray, or something called like a Payne's gray, which is a fine color, but what's more interesting is when you come up with a mixed gray, which is called a grisaille, which is the combination of your triad of colors. So I'm mixing up a little bit of my blue, a little bit with my red, to come up with a nice purple. And when I have that, I'll clean my brush just a little bit, and I'll pull in purple's complement, which is that yellow. And that will give me a really beautiful mixed gray. And that is going to have a lot more life and a lot more interest than just a pre-mixed tube. It goes a little bit too green. I add just a tiny bit of red to bring it again back to our neutral. This may take the most time of any of your assignments, learning to come up with just what is that nice middle gray. And that's pretty good. Sometimes it'll be a little bit more warm, meaning it's closer to yellows or reds. Sometimes it may be a little bit more cool, which means it's closer to the blues, but you want to find that nice middle tone. So I think I have something. I'm going to test it on the paper. Hey, I like that. And that's pretty darn good. That has all of those little color notes of the red and the blue and the yellow, which make it a much more interesting and richer color. And the advantage of knowing how to do this is it helps you later on establish all your neutrals as you're creating a painting. It's very easy to be seduced by color. It's very easy to really love the intensities and the excitement of color, but kind of like cymbals in an orchestra performance, you can't make your entire painting about those notations. You have to build up to it. There has to be some elements which allow those punctuations to be meaningful. Because if your entire painting is at the same volume, is at the same intensity, then it ends up drowning itself out. So finding that composition that allows for those understandings and that sophistication, that's vital. So if you can understand how to set up value and work with grays in order to create your painting, then you'll have something that's pretty excellent. That's a little more blue. So it just becomes pushing and pulling and moving back and forth. to build that up. And again, it's easy to mix the colors, but coming up with that value scale, that's the hard part. So I'm going to go a lot darker here for my dark notes. Give myself a nice rich purple. Clean my brush. Pull in some yellows. There we go. Okay, we'll let that dry a little bit. We'll take a look at it and see what we think. But being able to mix up color and values on your palette and bring them to your piece of paper and your composition is a really vital skill. You may want to try this several times and make sure that you feel comfortable with it, because this is the meat of watercolor painting. There's other issues we'll talk about. Making sure your surface is dry, looking at the interaction of colors, looking at how to build a composition from one state to the next. But this is fundamental. So make sure that you are comfortable doing this, and that will allow you to do a whole lot of other things with ease.